Which doesn't explain why you were driving in the first place. It sounds stupid. I had a bad dream. I decided to go for a drive, get away. He gave me a look that conveyed a whole idea. That does sound stupid. But he was too polite to say it out loud. The inconsistency of my actions, he must have thought I was on drugs. Laird returned to the porch. The look he gave me, too calm, too casual, made me shiver. Landlord confirms the time, he said. And a car was found on the side of the highway. I jammed my hands in the pockets, where the cold was starting to numb my fingers. If you visit the sandwich shop at the rest stop, just a little up the road from where the car was picked up, the manager and a middle-aged blonde woman can confirm. She gave me a ride here. We'll check, the RCMP officer said. What's this about? I asked. I knew, but I wasn't supposed to know. Can we step inside? Laird asked. You look cold. Not without a warrant, I said. Better to seem unfriendly and overly emotional than risk letting an enemy inside safe territory. What's this about? The RCMP officer answered, Molly Walker, the owner of this house, was found mauled in the woods. If I'd harbored any concerns about seeming too blass, they were gone in the instant I heard those words. Mauled? Brutally attacked by a human, if the tracks are any indication, the officer said. We're not offering any particular details at this point. I said. I stopped, then tried to start again, but the words didn't escape my mouth. It didn't help that I didn't know what to say. I'd known, but to hear it like this, from very human sources, minus all of the mystic crap. You what? The RCMP officer asked me. She has family in town. They moved to be closer to our grandmother. We know. We've spoken with them, the officer said. They pointed us here. We'd like to come inside and see if there's anything that could explain the attack. I shook my head. No. Irene Walker gave us permission to investigate the premises. Which meant letting this Laird Behame person into the house. No. It's not her call, I said. I'm sorry. I can give you the number of the lawyer. The way I understand it, the house would pass on to me, if Molly was dead. It's my property, it's my say. Not without a warrant. This isn't reflecting well on you, Mr. Thorburn, the RCMP officer said. I know, I said. My mouth was dry, and my eyes were tearing up from the cold and the recent announcement. Yeah. I'm sorry. I need time to process the news, and I'm not going to make good calls, as tired and confused as I am. It's better if you talk to the lawyer. Mr. Beasley? Laird asked. Mr. Beasley, right, I said. I'm familiar with him, he said. When the RCMP officer looked in his direction, he said, there's a great deal of concern over this house, in local circles. The town is booming with the addition of the train station and the proximity to Toronto, property prices are soaring, and the amount of good land that can be bought is somewhat limited, due to certain geographical concerns rooted in this property. The last time I paid any attention to the money, this property was worth $20 million. It's worth more now, I said. I imagine. A great many locals are very interested, Laird said, his eyes fixed on me. Mr. Beasley has been handling the bulk of the disputes for the family. I know him. With your permission, I'll talk to him and see what we can't figure out. Please do, the RCMP officer said. I'd like to have a moment to talk to Mr. Thorburn here, if that's all right. If he's telling the truth and he has inherited the property, I wouldn't mind the chance to talk this through with him. The RCMP officer didn't seem happy with that. You're aware of the time constraints? Of course. I'll talk to Mr. Thorburn, then the lawyer, and we can meet for dinner. I'll fill you in. The RCMP officer took that in. All right. I need to make some calls. Call me when you're done. Laird nodded. Together, we watched the RCMP officer trudge away through the snow, his boots squeaking. When he was gone, Laird withdrew a pocket watch from his coat. He popped it open, looked, and then closed it, holding it in one hand. His implement? I admit, thought it was a girl, here. No, I responded. I'm just as surprised to be here as you are to see me here. Well, if it helps, I think you're innocent, he said. Yeah. I asked. Here's the honest truth, I wasn't lying when I said I wanted to discuss things with you. You're a pretty honest guy, huh? I asked. Stupid. Stupid question. I suspect you and I both know why, he said. Can we do away with pretense? I sighed. Sure. I believe you're innocent because I know who killed Molly Walker. Who? I asked. I was getting colder, now. He only shook his head. I can't say. It will probably go unsolved, the media will report it, but it won't be sensationalized. Good officers will most likely put in a genuine, honest effort and find nothing. Doesn't this kind of conflict with the oath you swore, when entering office? Or are you faking the police thing? He smiled. Rest assured, I studied for my position, I earned it, and I've maintained it in good conscience. I'd rather talk about you. Would you be up for a walk? A walk? I asked. If you're worried, I can promise you my protection for as long as you're in my company. I'll take you somewhere where we can talk, then bring you back, as safe as I can manage it. Which is how safe? I asked. I don't know what your protection is worth. You're thinking I've limited myself somehow, he asked, clearly amused. I'm thinking anything is possible. If positions were reversed, I would trust my own daughters, who I care about deeply, to the care of someone of equivalent power. This isn't a trick? I asked. His smile faltered a little. This line of questioning is getting a touch grating. You didn't answer my question. This is not a trick, he said. My primary aim here is to find out who you are. You're an unknown quantity in a very delicate ecosystem. But we can talk about that more after. I suspect you'll gain more information than you give up. Right this minute, with everything that's happening, I'd rather be safe and warm than have information, I said. A bit of time to grieve might be nice. What if I offered to help streamline matters on the legal front? You'll be safer and warmer here than in a prison cell, awaiting a trial, he said. I considered the idea. I'd find that a little more tempting, I admitted. If you're interested, I'll wait while you get your coat and whatever else you deem necessary. Give me a minute, I said. I shut the door. I made my way to the living room. Don't, Rose said. It's answers, I said. It's dangerous, she responded. We can go the safe route. Like I was saying before. There's too much we don't know. I found my jacket. We've skimmed the little black book. Behaim they're one of the covens. There's a better word than coven, but sure. They're a local institution, maybe the oldest here. All the more reason to stay. He'll fix the legal situation, which is maybe the biggest concern right now. I don't know if we can do anything against ordinary people, if the cops decide to kick down the door. Blake. I don't get a say. You do, I said. But you were saying how you were going kind of crazy, alone. I'm going to lose it if I'm cooped up. I have to keep moving. I had to before I left home, and it only got reinforced after. If there's an opportunity to stretch my legs and get answers, while preserving my sanity, I'm going to take it. Blake, no. Yes, I said. Come with, as much as you can. I wouldn't mind the backup. I pulled on my coat, then rummaged in the closet to get a new scarf and hat. There were two that were plain enough to wear. The nurses. I stepped across the threshold, half convinced I'd get shot or something equivalent. When I didn't, I carefully locked the door. I stood there, hands still on the handle. You promise to smooth over the legal issues? I'll make this as stress-free for you as I can. Nobody will enter the house, if I can help it, which I can. I promise you this. The house is safe. I asked. He sighed. You don't know very much, do you? I'm a fast learner, but not as much as I'd like to know. I assure you, the house is safe. I don't know of anyone who could or would damage the house or property. If it was that easy, we would have removed it already. I turned, joining him in walking down the long, snow-covered driveway. Let me cut to the chase. I'd like to talk about a hypothetical scenario with you, he said. Sure, I said. Global politics, if you don't mind. I don't really mind. In this scenario, we've got a situation involving a number of countries. If you will, there's America. I'm rather interested in America for the purpose of this discussion, but that's just me. Powerful, perhaps overly proud, large, keepers of the peace. I glanced at his uniform. Sure. Then a European country. I would say they are very traditional, seductive, beautiful, very prone to holding grudges. More history, more set in their ways. I thought of the blonde women I'd seen at the table with him. I can picture it. There are others. Imagine a small, very old, and somewhat backwards nation. We'd then have a broad swathe of nature with very few settlements, as well as a very vibrant country that has just come into an inexplicable amount of wealth, which is liable to burn out quickly on its excess. As well as other bit players who shouldn't be ignored, but who aren't of import in our discussion, here. I tried to put faces to the descriptions, but it wasn't easy. Perhaps the man in the twisted tower, with the talking dog, for the latter. The girl with the checkered scarf if I went by. Process of elimination. I'm picturing an Aboriginal woman, I said. I can imagine such a woman leading this very old nation, yes. A young woman, in heavy clothing, with a rabbit, in the middle of the uninhabited, natural setting? Quite right. And a long-haired young man, for the wealthy country. Yes. If I were to add to this scenario, where would you fit a teenaged girl with a checkered scarf? He frowned. I'm at a loss. So am I said. The girl who had been talking to the other, with the face that stretched. He thought for a second, nodding and smiling a greeting at someone who apparently recognized him in passing. When we were clear, he said, ah. Someone who intruded on important meetings, perhaps. A new arrival to the scene. Is that so? Too new and too small to be a serious threat. Self-deluding, even, dealing in things she doesn't fully understand. A complicated situation. I'd call her a terrorist before I called her a local power. Fair enough. Can we call her Maggie, or is that mucking up the metaphor? We could call her that. Maggie Holt, I believe. I nodded. He took in a deep breath, opened his watch, then closed it, without looking at it. In this imagined scenario, we have a country in, say, our equivalent of South America. This hypothetical country is unpredictable, has a history of being aggressive, and it just so happens they are the only one in this imagined scenario who have nuclear weapons at their disposal. Nuclear weapons. It seemed an apt descriptor for the books I'd seen. Dangerous to handle, dangerous to use. Once they were brought to the table, everyone would lose. In this little story, the dictator died, and a successor was assassinated in short order, let's say. Now another one has taken the helm, and nobody is entirely sure what type of person the young man is, which is very concerning, considering the weapons he has at his fingertips. He could be reckless, he could be mild-mannered, he could be a merchant, a politician, or a student, but he's an unknown quality, and appearances can be deceiving. I can picture that, I said. Should this small southern nation cease to be a concern, everyone else profits, and the nukes being removed from the picture is only a small part of that. The other countries would be elevated to a new age, and the country who is most powerful will take the helm, quite possibly forever. If Hillsglade House was the small country Jacobs Bell the region. Is it so important? I asked. The resources or whatever you'd gain. A few acres. When things develop to a certain point, it takes on a different tone. Population, wealth, whatever else, they attract attention from everyone. With the current status quo, our little world here is small enough to be left alone. Understand, our little metaphor here falls apart when we cease talking about the area that falls within, say, 1,000 kilometers around us. I could start talking about other planets with their own drama and politics, if I really wanted to maintain the narrative, but those things really aren't our focus. I understand, I said. I also understood that the metaphor was making it very easy for him to outright lie, but that was a given. When our little world here grows, everyone with an established power base can ride the cresting wave. Prestige, fortune, status, with others visiting, or attempting to get in while the going is good, and paying a good price to do so. All right, I said. I'm starting to get a sense of this. The trouble is, when the road block, he half turned to gesture back at the house, is removed, and when things start developing, there will be a very small window of opportunity in which one of the local powers I just described might take the helm. If one doesn't, it's liable to be a more distant entity, and it's likely to be someone we couldn't hope to stand up to. Halfway across the world in this analogy, someone from outside Jacobs Bell. Another, greater power. The families here were small in the grand scheme of it all, and before the city grew and drew attention, they wanted to solidify their positions. He opened his pocket watch, then closed it without looking down, like a nervous tick, then continued. America rather likes the status quo, and if we were to see this small hypothetical country fall right now, it would be bad for America. America wouldn't take power, nor would the European country. It would be left to the newcomer, with all of his wealth, excess, and arrogance. I thought of what I'd read. The warning to stay out of the North End. This hypothetical wealthy country wouldn't happen to be to the north. Yes, to the north, Mr. Thorburn. I would like to see the small southern entity with the proverbial nukes be a very stable, calm, country for the time being. America would protect it, and things would be very calm and very peaceful for long enough that the wealthy newcomer might fade in his glory. So it isn't really friendship, is it? It's buying time. Then there's nothing to stop America from crushing the little country. It would be a temporary alliance, I'm afraid. I don't believe there's a way around it. What if the nukes were given up to greater authorities? Who would you trust to handle such things? The southern country in any country that received these goods would, in this scenario, become immediate targets, because nukes that are changing hands are far, far more dangerous than nukes that are sitting idle in one place. What if the nukes were destroyed? In exchange for certain concessions, to protect the southern country? Impossible. In this scenario, I'd describe it as radiation. Ugly elements would be let loose. Elements that are contained so long as the nukes are intact, you understand. If it's even possible to destroy those things. The person who put the things together was very, very conscientious. They can't be given away, because they're too dangerous. They can't be destroyed, because they're too dangerous, I said. In the best case scenario for our hypothetical little world, he said, our little southern country remains dormant for some time, and is quickly wiped out of existence, in a matter of weeks, months or years. I'm sorry. Analogy aside, he wasn't sugarcoating it. Somehow that made me feel better. I had my hands jammed in my coat pockets and I kept them there, but I pressed my arms tighter against my body. The nukes. The nukes are left where they are and everything is paved over, with numerous measures taken to ensure it remains that way. I felt cold, and I wasn't sure how much of it was the fact that I'd stood in the open doorway for long enough to let it soak into me, and how much was emotion and physical reaction. We walked on for a bit. People greeted Chief Behame as they passed him on the sidewalk. He greeted them warmly in turn. No consideration to the poor bastard who didn't even want to take over. I asked. I suspect the poor bastard is as good as dead already, Laird Behame said. I am sorry. If it helps, I don't think I'll enjoy the part 1 play in it. He sounded sorry. Would you like a coffee, Mr. Thorburn? Chief Behame offered. I looked for a mirror and found one, meeting Rose's gaze. I still felt numb, cold, a little less like a complete person than before. Slowly, surely, this situation was chipping away at me. A little warmth in the form of good coffee would go a long way. Sure. Please, I said. I'd expected a homey, small-town coffee shop for Jacob's Bell, but Laird guided me to a franchise instead. A small crowd had gathered within, teenagers done with the day of classes and adults done with work. Taking shelter from the cold. I didn't miss the sheer number of eyes that fell on me when I entered with the local chief of police. Hi Laird, one of the 20-somethings behind the over-lacquered wood counter said. A narrow guy with an apron and a flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows. Hi James. A middle-aged woman, lines in her face worn deep, otherwise fairly well dressed, asked, Who's this? Bringing someone in for the wedding? One of 2 blonde teenagers at a table by the line said, He's not one of ours, and there aren't any Behame sorts with that hair. I touched my hair. Wavy and dirty blonde, in contrast to the straight blonde hair these girls sported. I could connect the dots. Blonde girls, they might have been among the ones I saw while tossing and turning in bed, before waking up to all this. Wedding is a few months away, Laird said. As for who he is. He turned to me. Letting me make my own introductions. I'm Blake Thorburn. One of Rose's grandkids. There wasn't any shock or surprise, no outcry nor any particular reaction. I could see people shifting their weight. The middle-aged woman folded her arms, legs set apart. A few people who'd been idly looking my way were staring now. Something's happened to his cousin, Molly Walker, Laird said. The RCMP are looking into it. The Walker girl is dead? James asked. Murder, one of the blondes asked. She was savaged by something in the glade behind the box store. There were bites, claw marks, as well as evidence of tools being used. We'll know more when the coroner gets back to us tonight. Tools. Oh my gosh, a heavy-set man at the far end of the counter said, going white. It was murder then, the older of the blonde girls asked. I wasn't sure what color I was going, but I could feel a sick feeling in my chest. The smells of the coffee were getting more intense. Too intense. I'd known she'd been mauled. I'd known she'd been attacked, and that she'd been scared, but this was the worst bit of all. Tools. How did one use tools? Do you need to step into the washroom? Laird asked. No, I said. But give me a second. Someone was murdered. In Jacob's Bell, the heavy man asked. We don't know if it was intended as a murder, Laird said. At the very least, she was attacked, and she did die that same night, possibly from the cold or blood loss. For the time being, it's a good idea to stay safe, don't stay out too late, and tune into tonight's news. I'll be giving an announcement to fill everyone in. And him? The blonde girl asked. I don't think there's a lot of doubt about why someone might have gone after Ms. Walker, Laird said. Others might come after him. We were having a discussion regarding his safety, and we might talk about the house as well. Are you selling it? The employee behind the counter asked. Good Christ, James, the middle-aged woman said. His cousin just died, and you're asking about that? Everyone's going to ask, James said. People are in debt, and once that house sells, property values dash. I'm not saying you're wrong, she said. I'm saying it isn't the time. James frowned. Can I get you something, Laird? Coffee, black. James had it ready in seconds. Blake, was it? You want anything? No, thank you, I said. I still felt a little ill. Tools had been used. What did that even mean? Knives, scalpels? Or hammers and saws? Laird reached for his wallet, to pay, and James refused him. The ease with which Laird accepted that suggested it was a regular thing. Corner booth? Laird asked me. I nodded. The booth in the corner situated us away from any people. Laird was in the lead, and he took the seat that placed his back to the corner, which meant I had my back to the rest of the room. I sat down, hands clasped together in front of me for warmth, breaking the grip only long enough to turn around the napkin dispenser, so the reflective surface wasn't facing the wall. Rose wasn't there. Laird opened and closed his pocket watch. I could see the interior, a backing that had enough openings to reveal the complicated inner workings. The entire thing looked like it was made of gold and ivory. He'd grabbed 3 little paper packets of sugar, and tore 2 open. I watched as he tore them open, then emptied them. They missed his drink entirely, forming a little dune onto the table, with grains dancing across the slick, not quite washed surface. He moved his cup, placing it onto the pile, and sliding it across the table. When he lifted it, the sugar was left in a crescent shape where it had been dragged by the underside of the cup. He emptied the remaining packet, a smaller pile in the center of the crescent, and then 3 lines, fanning outward, on the other side. The edge of the paper packet helped give the 3 lines form. Almost half of a typical sun, as a child might draw it, with the rays fanning outward, and a dot in the middle. I could see the blonde girls turning in unison, glancing at Laird. A signal? I asked. My heart was pounding. I had no idea what this meant. Just the opposite. Keep an eye on the people. I did. 20 or 30 seconds passed, enough time that I almost spoke up. Then people stood up. The occupied booth nearest us emptied. A group of people entered the shop, and situated themselves at the far end. That should provide a bit of privacy, Laird said. He sipped his coffee. We tend to learn a few tricks, because it's expedient. This one is a bit of shamanism. Many of the circles here and there will look down on someone for dabbling. It's dangerous, and it leads to more mistakes. It's better, many say, to specialize, do one thing well. The Duchamp family there seems to hold to this idea. The Behame family doesn't. And my grandmother? I know she had an area of expertise, but the library is pretty comprehensive. I think your observations are apartment. She may well have been a rare talent, helped by a generous heaping of time. I chose to work, to have this be a definitive part of my life. There were periods I was more serious about it, points where it faded into the background, and I raised a family. I suspect your grandmother made it her life. I find it impressive, if I leave the particulars aside. Hard to imagine her like that. I imagine you have questions. About her, about all of this. Lots. Very few I'm comfortable asking. You don't want to show how little you know, perhaps. I wouldn't worry. Most of us were novices in the beginning. Most? I asked. Most. We have a local exception, even. Others almost assuredly exist. It is generally a bad habit to use absolutes, even outside of certain circles. None, all, every, always, and so on. Right, I said. You're in a dangerous situation, Blake. The natural inclination is to be the cornered rat, to lash out, biting, in a frenzy. One would understand if you wanted to throw caution to the wind and fight us. Hypothetically speaking, I said, is there a reason I shouldn't? He raised his heavy eyebrows. Besides the obvious? Besides the obvious. Do you know the reason we discourage people from owning guns? Guns are dangerous, I said. A glance to the side indicated that some more people had come in. A group of kids started to drift towards the empty tables near us, then changed their minds and headed for the door. Taking their coffee and snacks to go instead of sitting in. Well, we're talking about dangerous things. Guns are more dangerous when in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to use them. Not to whoever poses a threat to them, but to themselves and to their loved ones. It's much the same here. If I'm going to die anyways, I said, what's the harm in self-defense? An attacker can take your gun from you. The idea is the same here. When we work, we're dealing with outside parties. If they don't succeed in their tasks, your opposition can make a better offer, or simply frustrate them to the point that whatever you sent comes back at you, angry and blaming you for the failure. I nodded slowly. He gestured down at the diagram in sugar. This idea recurs in any dealing with others. Always, there is a risk. Here, I make a meager food offering, create a sign to indicate what I want, and draw from the reputation I maintain with local community spirits. A bonus of my position. The spirits play along, because they know it keeps people safer and helps to keep the community safe, and because they know I'll make a better offering later, a habit I've established. The end result? They turn people away before they sit nearby, and we can talk without fear of eavesdroppers. And these benign spirits can turn on you. Always a concern, with any other. If something goes wrong, if I allow too many people to go out into the cold instead of sitting here and someone gets hurt, or if the business starts to suffer here due to a lack of customers, my credit with these same spirits might become strained, and they might take issue. At the very least, I'd get less free coffees. At worst, I might find events conspiring to take my position from me, or I might even get drawn and quartered in the streets. More grotesque imagery. It made me think of Molly's fate. I leaned back. Wouldn't practitioners be making those sorts of mistakes more often? It happens from time to time. A handful of occurrences a year, for a given area. But these things are rarely sudden, and they can take a variety of forms. As it's rarely a single monumental mistake, errors like this tend to cause a long series of events that can be tied together, telling very plausible stories. Building racism or intolerance in a sub-community, peaking in a mob assault. A high-risk investor's accounts bottom out all at once, causing financial ruin. You'd be surprised at what's believable, when looked at from outside, or how easy it is to let this happen. One can unknowingly offend one subset of others while trying to please another, or spend too much credit and overdraw their accounts. I nodded. And the bigger events? We were just talking about the equivalent of nukes. Most areas are stable. A lord or lords sit in power, well situated, unlikely to change more than once every 50 to 100 years, if that. In smaller areas, things are typically enforced within the community, and it's too much effort for too little gain, to cross too many lines and take such risks. The only places where you're liable to see anything dramatic are places that are on the brink of great change, or places undergoing that change, places where people see an opportunity to seize greater status or better positions. That change helps to hide things. Like a girl being beaten and tortured in the woods might be explained away as a side effect of the Hillsglade House dispute, I said. My tone was a bit harder than I'd intended. Though we were out of earshot, I could see the blonde girl's glance my way. Yes, Laird said, just as calm as he'd been before. Getting around to your question, things that are hard to explain away tend to end in people disappearing, rather than bodies being found. The locals will then clean up, and they will be upset with the culprit for the inconvenience and the risk. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. I want you to trust me, Blake. We may be enemies, but that doesn't preclude trust and respect, much less an open dialogue. I glanced again at the metal side of the napkin dispenser. Rose was still absent. Laird finished off his coffee, then set it down on the table. He opened his pocket watch, then closed it. I take it that's your implement, I said. And my familiar, he said. After a fashion. He opened the pocket watch to show me. As before, I saw the openings that revealed the inner workings. After 2 seconds, however, other hands slipped out from beneath the hour, minute and second hands. One went backwards, while the other went slow. He rested the end of the pocket watch on the table, and I could feel the steady tick of it being transmitted across the surface, akin to the beating of a heart. Implements can be familiars? I asked. Unconventional, but a police dog was off the table, and I wouldn't want to spend the rest of my life dealing with any other that would need to take such a large and inconvenient mortal form. Not that this one is so weak. So it's talking to you? It can, but just now it was doing me the service of telling me the time. I can't take too long, I'm expecting a call from the coroner and a meeting with Magwin, he said. We might have some room for conversation before I go, but first I'm going to need to top up my coffee. Can I get you anything? I shook my head. I was thinking we could talk about a deal. Something to keep things safe and calm for everyone involved. If we went that route, I could protect you and buy you time to find a way out, if one exists. Maybe ruminate on that, so we can jump straight into the conversation at the first opportunity. Sure, I said. He stood from his chair, empty cup in hand. I turned in my seat to watch Laird join the line. With the crude little diagram in sugar, there was a bit of a crowd at the other end of the coffee shop, with people gathering and waiting for their coffees at the one end of the counter, the general line, people finding seats and people coming and going. 20 or so people in all, but still a good number. I don't trust him, Rose said, the words distorted. I glanced at the dispenser. Sure enough, I could see her blurry reflection. I murmured my reply, I don't either. Word had apparently gotten around. People were glancing my way, gathering around Laird. I withdrew my cell phone from my pocket and raised it to my ear. I'd get enough stares without talking to myself. Rose said, I went to go get the little black book. Dramatis Personae. I've got others in a grocery bag. I didn't like how incomplete our knowledge was, so I did more digging. Behaim's Circle, a gender-neutral term for covens, specializes in chronomancy, with a secondary focus in augury. I could recall reading that, but I'd been skimming, to see where the real threats were, and my focus had been on essentials. Chronotime. And omens. Explains the pocket watch, I replied. The little black book says that grandmother thought the watch was a zeitgeist. Not in the pop culture term either. A literal zeitgeist, a spirit of time. Those are his tools, the means he uses, so if he's going to try something, it's going to work in a way related to them. Both concretely and abstractly. Keep going, I said. With implements, the shape it takes is an indicator in how the practitioner works. A wand is very direct, pointing to things, aimed at specifics. A staff is more dramatic, cumbersome. A fan might be more personal, an accessory, directing things inward. Pens are focused on labels and premeditation. It's symbolic, I said. I watched Laird order his coffee. Abstract. I can work with that. I've spent enough time around artists, I think I can do as-pull interpretations. A watch. It's less direct than the object's essentials gave as examples. It doesn't suggest anything particular. It's a way of seeing how the world works on a fundamental level. For someone who does the omen thing, I can sort of understand that. Right. But what's he pulling here, if he's pulling anything? He might be getting more information out of us than we're getting. Which I wouldn't mind. I've got an ugly feeling, Rose said. Like he's playing us. You know. Yeah, I said. I didn't take my eyes off Laird. It doesn't feel like it's just a little bit of information gathering. No, Rose said, very much on the same page with me. No, it doesn't. Something else, then, I said. Time I'm thinking about what he could pull on that front, but I'm not coming up with anything time-related. We don't have any major appointments, no. I saw the blonde girls get up, and I tensed. I couldn't say what I was tensing up to do, but I wanted to be ready for anything. They glanced my way, unsmiling, before stopping to talk to Laird for a second and then leaving. Not long enough to plot something. He has other tricks up his sleeve, Rose said. Having a focus doesn't mean you can't do something else. He said he dabbled in a variety of things, I said. But there's too much we don't know on that front, I'd go crazy trying to figure it out. There aren't many options, Rose said. We don't know much. Pocket watch, familiar, implement. Who was he, how did he operate? A keeper of the peace, a police officer, a family man invested in community. He was a figure, a pillar in the community. I looked down at the pattern in sugar. What are you thinking? Rose asked. I was thinking he could use those spirits from before to make these people lynch me. Could he? I don't know, I said. But it doesn't fit. I mean, yes, he sort of lured me here. But he seems too orderly. It could be a mask, she said. A deception. It could be, I said. Except the watch is orderly. Overcomplicated, maybe, but it's orderly. For a personal icon of who he is, for a badge, it doesn't fit that the guy holding that item in particular would turn around and incite a riot. True, Rose said. I could see Laird at the station at the far end of the counter, getting sugar packets, no doubt. People had mobbed him, with questions about the murder, the house, and me, no doubt. I spoke my thoughts aloud. A badge. It's a really nice watch. Maybe there's more to it. Nuances. It's old-fashioned, which ties into the whole mucking with time idea. It's beautiful, attention-getting, a status symbol. Okay, Rose said. How does that affect how he applies his magic? I glanced down at the diagram in sugar. Influencing crowds, people, and perceptions, I said. I stood from my seat. With time at the heart of it, as his primary focus? If I read something like that in one of the books, Rose said, I'd buy it. I crossed the room to reunite with Laird. I had to make my way through the local flavor. Girls in Ugg boots with vests and backpacks, no doubt commuters from Toronto colleges, too many flannel shirts, a couple of truckers in baseball caps who were blithely ignorant to the fact that the headwear was ill-suited to the season, and some middle-aged women who looked like they'd smoked far too much. Hey! Barista James called out. I turned. Do me a favor, he asked. He jerked a thumb towards the door. Maybe clear out. Ah, the hostility that Molly had alluded to. Clear out. Get going. I'm going to kick everyone else out soonish, but those guys are actually buying stuff. I still felt lost, and it didn't help that I was splitting my attention between James and my search for Laird in the crowd. Kick everyone out. Closing, he said. I was no longer searching for Laird. With that one word, he had my attention. Very carefully, I said, early to close. Small town, he answered. 8's late enough. 8. My eyes searched the crowd. The college girls, the truckers. An entirely different group from before. I'd just lost 4 or 5 hours. Laird was nowhere to be seen. He'd stranded me. I pulled my hat and scarf from my pockets and had them on before I was out the door, taking long strides. The light outside the window was a streetlight, not daylight. As I glanced up at it, it seemed to decrease in intensity. Almost as if it were apologizing for the deception, or as if the light was one of the last things to catch up with the new status quo. It was night. It wasn't a jump. It was a blurring. Me, the other people, environment and all other things sort of sliding along to a new time at their own paces. No comment was made that I'd been at the coffee shop for 4 or 5 hours. The snow crunched under my feet. I had questions. He'd promised this wasn't a trap, but what had his wording been? Could I even worry about that right now? If he'd lied, it was on his head. Either way, this was my situation to deal with. People here and there were on the street. A man, smoking, staring at me the entire time I walked down the length of 1 block. A woman sitting on the porch, doing the same. Cold looks. Were any of them others? Practitioners? I felt the hollowness of an empty stomach, despite the anxiety. My mouth was dry. Was my body belatedly catching up with me, in terms of the lost hours? A man, bundled up in winter clothes with hat, scarf, jacket, slacks and boots all in black stood in the middle of the sidewalk, at the end of the block. His eyes were fixed on the snowbank in front of him, his breath fogging with the slow, steady breathing. He didn't move at my approach. Unnerved, I crossed the street, triple-checking for cars. "It smells like a rose," a man announced. "It's as beautiful as a rose. I dare say it's as fragile as a rose, once you get past the thorns. But is it really our rose?" I turned. 3 20-somethings, if I went by appearances, were approaching me from behind. I might have been off. Each had alcohol in brown bags. I recognized one of them from the vision. He was the one speaking, his arms thrown out to either side, for the drama of it. "Porrick," I said. "The one who had been with the girl in the checkered scarf." "Another." "I prefer Patrick in polite company," Porrick said. "Good grief, little Rose, where are your thorns? You're defenseless." They kept walking, not slowing as they drew closer to me. I backed away a step, then another. Behind Porrick was a beautiful, willowy young woman in a long black coat and a man with a very fine bone structure on his face, his fine brown hair expertly styled, shining with the snowflakes that had gently alighted on it. I might not have given them a second glance, except their faces weren't flushed with the cold. "This rose has no eyes, which is only natural, but it's usually sharper," Porrick said. I had to back away a step. "It has been cast away. Denuded." My instincts were screaming at me to act. The problem was that they were telling me to do things that would make this go very, very badly. When the woman spoke, her voice was almost more musical for her drunkenness, wrapped in her fascination. "There's a vulnerability, isn't there? Like seeing a king without his clothes. A movie actress howls in fear, nothing held back. A chieftain begs like a craven coward. The beauty of a thing with all the protection stripped away," Patrick said. He pulled off his hat, holding it to his chest, as if in mourning. His bright red hair was cut to a length just above a buzz cut, carefully cultivated ringlets framing his face. "Except the skin," the other man whispered. "Beautiful, beautiful," the woman said. "So fragile. Won't you dance with us?" She reached out, and her smile was a timid one. All the scarier because of how obviously calculated it was. The realization of just how bad that one knee-jerk reaction was settled in so quickly, I suspected I'd seen it coming. But I didn't like being touched. "I've been rebuked," she said. The back of her hand found her forehead, face turning skyward. Her playfulness belied the glitter of anger in her eyes, when she glanced down at me to gauge my reaction. "The rose is usually better at the verbal jousting," Patrick said. He swayed a little, then caught himself with a hand on the woman's shoulder. She reached up to lay her hand across his, as if it were all choreographed, an act. "It's brutish to fall back on physical violence. It's almost insulting, to see a creature that so resembles us, acting so basely," the woman said. "It is, isn't it, Ev? An affront." His male companion stepped around me, alighting briefly on a snowbank that my foot would have plunged into, before coming to a stop just behind my left shoulder. When I looked, Patrick was to my right, back to the wall. "But moods do shift so dramatically from generation to generation," Patrick finished. "It adds a liveliness to the proceedings, breaks the patterns we so easily fall into. It's why we love you, my Rose." I wanted to cut in, to speak, but I wasn't sure what to say. The confusion of being cast 5 hours into the future wasn't helping, nor was being surrounded. It was all I could do to avoid a repeat performance that would get them really offended. "I'm sorry for that," I said, looking the woman in the eyes. "It was crude. I regret it." "Then will you let me touch you?" she asked. No, I said. She pouted a little. You're afraid. That's okay. You're so small, so fragile. A petal adrift in the wind, that will soon dry up and do nothing more than feed the bugs and return to the earth. I can fix that. Give you life, like you've never imagined it. All of the best things you could ever experience, in tastes, touches, music and song. It's like cheating, Patrick said. We both know there's nothing good waiting for you at the end, my Rose, not while your bloodline has this weight pulling it down. You and your children and your children's children, all down the line, there's only one place you can go. But we can give you the paradise you and yours are denied. 2-3 centuries. Sublime things, everything you thought you might enjoy, and everything you never even considered. There'll be so little left of you when it's all done that it won't even matter where you're going. I can flense your skin, the other man said. But without pain. The movement of air as someone enters the room will have you arching your back, whimpering in anticipation. I'm afraid I'll have to decline, I said. I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. I felt more than a little backed against a wall, here. It wasn't just being surrounded. Patrick wasted no time in seizing on that weakness. Are you sure? No more fear, no concerns. If you're worried about the bloodline, I'm sure we could round up someone to make it happen, allowing you to do your duty. You can be as specific as you like, whatever your preferences in body, hair, personality. Keller here might even enjoy hunting them down. Keller. The male companion, almost avian in features, with the bone structure, the gaze. Somehow, it was easy to imagine him as a hunter. We can even make the birth painless. An exercise in joy, rather than pain, without blood or sweat or tears, Ev said. Something beautiful that could be the centerpiece for a party. Architecture and dances and music, all around one singular event, with a moment of crescendo dash. This rose is male, Keller said. Men don't give birth. Male? Ev asked. She gave me a closer look. I was pretty sure no humans had made that mistake since I was 5 or so. Patrick, for his part, mused, I forgot that detail. I'm sure we could make it happen. Do you want to try, my Rose? I took advantage of the momentary confusion to cut in, I have other obligations. Well, Patrick said. He shifted position, coming damn close to brushing up against me. That leaves us with a problem. You've offended Ev, and decorum demands that things be made right. If you won't accept our invitation, then how will this be resolved? It's all right, Ev said. She wobbled a bit, and then stepped to one side to lean against the wall. She took another drink from the bottle. I'll settle for him giving me his apologies. Perhaps a kiss on the cheek. My heart thudded in my chest. A kiss? Was there a trap here? No. It wasn't my voice. Rose. All 3 of the strangers backed away from the wall, until they could see the window where Rose was reflected. With the curtains drawn, the streetlights reflected her well in the glass of the window. Ah, Patrick said. He glanced between us. I like this. We can't take your deal, Esselt. I hope we can arrange something else, Rose said. We can. But first, I must insist, Patrick hopped up onto the 4-inch window sill, taking a knee, somehow without falling or touching the glass. He reached through the glass and put a hand on the back of Rose's neck, then drew her forward, his head passing into the window to plant the lightest of kisses on her forehead. He hopped down, giving me a plain view of a very startled Rose. Whatever happened? Patrick asked. Now we have 2 roses, but they're so vulnerable. Thornless. It makes you just want to break them, Ev said. So you can have those last beautiful moments all to yourself. And a mess, Rose said. Messes can be cleaned up, Ev said. Memories are forever, and forever is a very long time. Hear, hear, Patrick said. He, Ev and Keller each tipped their bottles back to drink. Patrick licked the corner of his mouth. The breaking will have to wait, Rose said. Until we've resolved this issue of Blake's manners. I'm afraid he can't give you his apologies. It's too high a price. If he needed to make amends to someone else in the future, what would he do? But that's half the fun, Ev said. Watching the dance that follows the exchange. We're in an awkward spot, Rose said. We didn't intend to be out after dark, but Laird Behane pulled a trick on us. He promised us his protection while we were in his presence, and then he disappeared on us, and turned the hands on the clock forward. A rose is safe in the company of other mortals, and a rose is safe in daylight, but a rose with both is safest, and a rose without bereft, Patrick said. He drank a bit more. I don't think we're safe even in crowds and daylight combined, Rose said. It's a bad time. An eventful time, Patrick said. A shame. We'll have to leave. Will you? Rose asked. There's still a topic of us needing to make amends. What if we promised something? Not a deal, but to consider a deal, at some point in the future. It leaves the door open to your staying. Patrick seemed to be oblivious to the question, as if he hadn't heard, but I couldn't help but notice how still the other two were. The problem with that, Patrick said, is my merry little band here is forbidden to make deals. You were dealing with Maggie Holt, I said. Weren't you? That, he said, raising a finger. He let his arm drop, wasn't one of the things you saw. I'm positive. But? I asked. But yes, little Maggie and I, we were breaking rules, my lovely Rose. You could break rules with us, too, my counterpart said. If you took our offer, and if we considered your offer and found it sensible. We'll even throw in a promise to keep your secret. That is a deal I'll take, then, he said. You aren't awake, so I'll take you at your word. Disappoint, and I'm sure we'll find a suitable punishment. We'll endeavor not to give you a reason, Rose said. Then I'll take the debt this Blake owes my Ev, and make it my own. I can think of ways to make you pay that, Ev said. Fox hunting. Patrick made a face, but he didn't respond. Ev smiled again, a shy smile that rang false. Carry on, then, little roses, Patrick said, as Ev brushed her hand over his short red hair. We'll be in touch. I turned to go, feet crunching in the snow. Rose was to my left, reflected in the windows where the lights weren't on. It took me 5 or 10 minutes to get my heartbeat under control. Thank you, I said. I'm glad to do something, Rose replied. Damn it, just how much reading have you done? None, for them. I had a minute to read their entries in the little black book, but I was winging it. Good winging. I hope so, Rose said. We rounded the corner, and the house was in sight. Another person's footsteps fell alongside my own, as I approached the crosswalk. He stopped when I stopped. I looked and I saw Laird. You bastard, I said. Oh, I'm a little bit of a bastard, Laird admitted. I clenched my fist. I'm also a cop. I did agree to escort you home, though I didn't say from where. It's your choice, whether you want me to escort you back and leave you alone, or escort you back and then haul you to the police station. It's not. For your information, a safe haven. I stuck my hands in my pockets. Then why didn't you arrest me? I asked, my voice still hard with anger. If you wanted to leave me hanging out to dry, for others to pick off. Because I was telling the truth. I was interested in learning more about who you were. Whether you were someone who could become dangerous or if you were someone I could trust to be passive for as long as we needed you to. It may come down to picking you off until we get one of the young ones. Roxanne, I believe. 12. Or even your little sister Ivy, if Roxanne is uncooperative. And the talk of a peace treaty? I never promised anything concrete, I only expressed an interest. Saying you'd trust your daughters to someone like you, if positions were reversed. To someone as strong as me. If positions were reversed, I wouldn't know any better than you did, by definition. I double-checked beforehand. And the promise about there being no tricks? I said it wasn't a trick. Which it wasn't, at the time. I came up with the one while we were talking. Why wasn't Paige in this position? She'd love this quibbling over semantics, if nothing else. What if I attacked him right here? What if I denied him the chance to escort me back, fulfill his oath? Would he be forsworn? Would he lose his power? He opened his watch, then closed it. His breath fogged heavy around him as he sighed. You have protectors, he cut in. The exiled prince, Porik. I didn't ask for protection. It would be fleeting, whatever the case, Laird said. They're distractible. I didn't want to engage him in conversation, but curiosity niggled at me. Fairy? I guessed, eyes straight forward. Once upon a time, they would have fallen under that label. I think they've dallied in the very courts that have exiled them now, as a matter of fact. They even have some of the same tricks. But classifying others is a dangerous thing. Better to call them what they are. Which is men and women who are desperate to entertain themselves over the course of a very long, long time, he said. They get bored as easily as you or me. We reached the gates, and started treading up the driveway to the house. We were silent up until I reached the door. If it helps, Laird said, the reason I decided to have you walk most of the way back alone was because I suspect you could be dangerous. Yet you make yourself my enemy by tricking me. I would say that I am, along with my circle, the least of your worries. I'm sworn to do no direct harm to others, and I won't. My family is interested in securing our position, and we're thus interested in having you, or one of you, secure in this house, until the North End sorcerer is unseated. You can't afford to have your back turned to the others while you deal with me. I'm also best equipped to deal with the sorts of things you might send after me, if you deign to go that route. I've been preparing against Rose for my entire life. And now you walk away, after this? We're supposed to be civil. In your position, knowing what I know, I would, he said. I would also make haste and awaken sooner than later. I managed to hide my shock. He tapped his eye. We can see things at work, once we awaken. Tell your companion I said hi. There's no need to hide. Council meeting is in 2 days. For 3 hours prior and 3 hours after, there is a ceasefire. I hope to see you then. I stepped into the house, then slammed the door. Rose was waiting in the living room. Hey. We came out of it okay. Not okay enough, I said. That could have gone far worse. I kicked the footstool over. It crashed against the grill that protected the fireplace, making a very dramatic sound. You can't get so angry, she said. Be calm, we approach this with strategy and a level head. No, I said. I grabbed one of the books from the coffee table. Anger is good. Good. It keeps us moving. You read the book on implements, I'll read up on familiars when I'm done essentials. Okay, she said. The quiet outrage kept me reading through the night. I paced. The domain's text in hand, I walked from one end of the living room to the other, then walked back. Another trip back and forth, and I stopped by the window, using the edge of the book to push the curtain back. It was dusk outside, just past sunset, day 2, and some of the locals had emerged. If I didn't know better, I might have thought the locals were trying to put pressure on me. Men and women, some children, simply staking out the perimeter of the fence. Some of them paced like I was doing, like tigers in their cell, while others were patient, smoking or holding phones to their ears. A number of the children were standing on the short stone wall, hands wrapped around the metal curls and spikes of the railing, eyes on the house. Some talked, others were silent. Most were normal enough I wouldn't have looked twice. A handful weren't. One little boy, separate from the others, kept scratching at his head, face, neck and arms, his fingers coming away black with his own blood, or so it appeared in the gloom. I could see the gouge marks, dark lines cut into his skin. He would turn away, and they would be gone the next time I got a chance to see. There was a woman with hair, hat and coat covering much of her face, but when I did get a glimpse, I saw only vague, black smudges where her eyes and mouth should be. She held a cigarette up near her face, but never inhaled from it. The others seemed rather intent on avoiding her, giving her a wide berth as she paced. A car passed down the length of the road. I tried to use the headlights to get a better look at the things, but the headlights revealed a mostly empty sidewalk, no others but a small group of the children that had hopped down from the fence and were simply walking as a group, heads covered by hats and hoods, hardly worthy of a glance. My eyes had to adjust from focusing on the headlights. The others appeared from dark spots, and stepped out from behind the pillars that framed the gate. I let the curtain drop, then resumed the pacing. I'd read the same page 5 or 6 times. "You're making me nervous," Rose said, startling me. "You've been pacing the entire time I've been gone." Her hair was wet. She'd left to go shower, but she still wore the same clothes as before. Apparently she had running water on her side. That was interesting, considering there wasn't necessarily anything for the pipes to connect to. "I'm nervous," I said. "I ordered pizza, but I didn't think they'd come crawling out of the woodwork like this. There's a good 10 or so out there." "Why did you order pizza?" she asked. "Because I'm hungry," I responded. "There's nothing more than the most basic stuff in the kitchen. I'm going to go crazy or get sick living off flour tortillas, canned beans and tuna, and since I've got to figure out a way to keep myself supplied, I might as well start sooner than later." "Pizza isn't supplies. Pizza is a way of testing the waters," I said. "Will anyone in this town do business with me? If I can't order a pizza, I might have trouble getting groceries delivered. If I can't get groceries delivered, then I need to find a reliable, safe way of going outside." "So you put a pizza guy in the line of fire?" "I know," she said. "Except I don't even have the physical needs to gauge by, and it's awfully dark in here." I peeked outside. 2 others had joined the group. One was very talkative, engaging with the eyeless, mouthless woman who had the cigarette, even venturing into the 4 or 5 foot bubble of personal space around her that the rest seemed to be respecting. I reached for the phone. Mine changed. "Bell Pizza. What can I do you for?" "I'd like to cancel my order," I said. "You've already paid for your order. The food is made and is on its way. We can't provide a refund." "It's fine. Keep the money. Just call back the delivery guy so he doesn't waste his time." There was a pause. "I'm sorry. We can't refund your pizza, because we already prepared it. It should be there in 10 minutes or less." He was feigning ignorance, with a touch of a bad accent, but he couldn't hide the smugness. "You're being intentionally dense," I said. The guy on the other end hung up. "So now what?" Rose asked. "I don't know," I said. "I doubt he'll give me a fair hearing if I call back. I don't really know what to expect, here. Even reading up on the basics, it doesn't get into much depth about this." Rose nodded. Essentials and Famulus were more focused on other practitioner relationships than general other human relationships. I could see her fidgeting. I leaned forward. "Earlier, you said you were nervous. How does that work? You don't breathe any harder, since you don't breathe. Does your heartbeat pick up? Does your body flood with the stress hormones, making you fidget?" "That's a no on every count," she said. I turned away from the window to look at her. She elaborated, "My body's always the same. Stable, steady, there, but not doing anything except I dunno. Maintaining appearances. But you get nervous." "My brain gets nervous," she said. "I'm not sure that makes sense, but okay," I replied. I looked down at the page I'd been rereading for the past 20 minutes, then tossed the book down onto the coffee table. "You're on to domains," she observed, craning her head to peer down. "Me too. It's a fitting thing to read up on, here," I said. "Making your own sanctuary, while we have enemies gathering at the gates. It seems like a pretty simple ritual." "Deceptively simple," Rose said. "Yeah, deceptively simple," I agreed. "You stake out the area, the magical equivalent of drawing out your borders and planting a flag, you say a few words, and you invite anyone, everyone and everything that objects to come and challenge you. Trial by combat. Riddles, placating them with deals, whatever you agree on. The bigger the area you try to claim, the bigger the invitation you broadcast. They each get to confront you the once, and the ritual ends when there are no challengers left, or when a set amount of time passes. Claim a space the size of a closet, maybe get 5 to 10 objections. Claim a house, get 50. I'm thinking that's one of the last things we want to do," Rose said. "When we have a familiar, and when we have an implement, so we have some ability to fight." "Except," I said, "it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? The domain gives us a steady supply of power, with bigger spaces giving us more power. It's a sanctuary, and a place where we can bend the rules in our favor. Right? So we need a tool or a familiar to lay claim to as big a space as we can pull off." "Yes. But we can't infuse our tool until we have some power to infuse it with," I said. "Except that power would ideally come from the domain," Rose said. I nodded, "or the familiar, in terms of strength and shaping how the tool functions. And we can't start talking with others about bringing them on board as a familiar until we have some established power already. Necessitating a tool and a claim to some land," Rose finished for me. "Each of the three things requires the two others." I nodded. "Or it necessitates a compromise. We pick one front, we make it easy, like you suggested, go with the bare minimum. Do one thing badly, use the leverage we gain to do the next thing in a mediocre way, and then use the two things to do really well with the last ritual." My pacing resumed, though I had my hands free, and I could stick them in the pockets of my wool hoodie. "How do the others do it?" Rose asked. "The Behaims and the Duchamps?" "They have backup, I imagine," I said. "A mom and dad who are willing to sit in on a meeting with a familiar and vouch for them, or maybe even have a familiar arranged from early on or before the kid is born, things ready-made, a space set aside." "Magical trust fund kids," Rose said. "Basically," I said. "What about the North End sorcerer? What about him? I take it you didn't read the little black book from cover to cover?" "Look him up." I shuffled through the tomes to find where I'd put the book. I was going to read it later, after the major four were done, before the council meeting. "You don't need to make excuses to me," Rose said. She had her own copy. Page 32. I opened the tiny book. Johannes Lilligard, believed to be an adopted name. Practitioner. The newest arrival in Jacob's Bell as of August 13, 09, he arrived at the council meeting of said date. Johannes appears no older than 25, but all facts suggest he claimed his domain 6 or more years ago, a region spanning all of Jacob's Bell, west and north of the hospital as well as the entire expansion north of the bridge. I paused in my reading there, to ask, "The bridge?" "The highway," Rose said. "It becomes a bridge where it passes over the marshland here." I pictured it, then stopped short. "Wait, the commercial area north of the highway. With the train station, the shops dash. The condos, the mall, the prefab houses, yes. As his domain. The book talks about it in the context of rooms, of houses at the most." Rose didn't reply. When I glanced her way, she was nodding, a serious look joining the general exhaustion on her face. "There's a catch there," I said. "A drawback." "Oh, right, you're only partway through," Rose said. "Domains are like trademarks. Periodically, people are going to test them. You need to respond, but you have the home court advantage. The law's on your side. But if you claim something that broad, and if you can't or don't defend it when someone else puts 1 foot over the line, that weakens your stance. But he's defending it. How? She pointed back at the little black book. I read. In conversation with Eamon Behaim and Sandra Duchamp, we mutually agreed that Johannes must have claimed the territory prior to the expansion appearing, though we're unsure of when this might have been, for none of us to hear the claim or be able to respond to it, nor how he was able to do this at what might have been the age of 13 or 14. Mara has declined to answer any questions, being more taciturn than her usual. Johannes seems to bear harsh wounds, no doubt tying back to his ambitious claim, with no use of 1 eye, 1 hand and 1 leg, though the tissues appear undamaged. He bears a set of antique pipes as his implement, and has a gatekeeper of the 7th ring, ref astral bodies, vol 3, and prime movers, as his familiar, named Faisal Anwar, which takes the form of a rather large Afghan hound. Note. Johannes has made his 2nd appearance at council meetings, February 6, year 2010. Occasion to expand my notes. Arrogant and justified in it. Enigmatic. He spends almost all of his time within his domain, stepping outside only to defend his claim and attend occasional meetings. This makes gathering information hard. Favors manipulation of space. Note. Touching up all of my notes, for my soon-to-be heiress. He is a manipulator, content to bait people and lure them to their doom. Fitting, given the implement of choice. He safeguards his domain by making it a fiefdom, with neighborhoods held by others and a handful of lesser practitioners. Stay clear, this is a threat you do not need to face down. I looked up at Rose. He's powerful, then. She said, he doesn't have a family. He had nothing given to him in advance, as far as we know. But he managed something. Okay, I said. So there are obviously other options. Approached directly, the situation is filled with contradictions and obstacles, but maybe there's an oblique answer, like Johannes found. Like what I was talking about with the witch hunters, Rose said. That again. I shook my head. You're refusing my ideas too fast, she said, and the emotion in her voice caught me off guard. She was irritated, upset. Have you even read up on witch hunting, Blake? No, I said. Have you? I can't. I need you to rotate the mirror in the study. Damn it, listen, there are things we can learn to do that don't rely on familiar, implement or domain. Like Laird's shamanism. Okay, I said. I'm very on board with that. But you aren't on board with getting the protections witch hunters have. If anything's going to get us killed, it's a knee-jerk reactions and making stupid assumptions. It's not that I don't like the idea of protection, I said. But when someone says, witch hunter, it makes me think of hunting things. Fighting, instead of defense. And I think that any of those protections we might use as practitioners are going to be found in books for practitioners. It's hard enough without overcomplicating it, sifting through all the stuff we can't use for some tidbits we could find elsewhere. Can we compromise? Maybe focus on getting this wizardry crap down, and we'll look at the witch huntery stuff later, as the side project it is. When I looked at Rose, she was frowning, eyebrows knit. Tapping her hand on some surface in front of her. We were similar in other ways. Prone to anger. But something told me that Rose wasn't one to actually show or exercise that anger. Something to watch for, if she was bottling up her stress. What outlets did she have to vent it, and how would she react if she couldn't? Fine, she said, in that way that girls were so very good at. She took a deep breath, then sighed. Purely for effect, I imagined. Calmer, she said, we shelve that idea. We can use trickery, deception, manipulation, to get our foot in the door, get one of the 3 major things we need. Agreed, I said. Harder than it sounds, because others are naturally deceptive and are probably looking out for those tricks. What else? We could try marshalling forces, like he is. We need a good rapport with others to figure out who we might pick for a familiar, right? There's a problem with that, I said. I reached for the mirror, then stopped. May I? Yes. I lifted the mirror from where I'd hooked it onto the bookcase, then carried it to the window, pushing the curtains apart. I set the bottom end of the mirror on the windowsill. There were 5 more others than before. All clustered around the fence. The rest were still there. Waiting. Rose was turned away from me, so I couldn't see her, and she was silent, leaving me to stand there, presenting our situation. That dash, Rose started. She stopped short as a car appeared, parking at the far end of the street, a sign perched on top. This time, seeing the vehicle approach, I could see how the others moved out of the way of the headlights. Stepping literally into shadows, or stepping to a position where they were out of sight. In the latter case, it looked like they were stepping out of my field of view, to where the fence or columns on either side of the gate were blocking my view, but I felt like they were doing it for everyone that might be looking. Finding a universal blind spot. A guy stepped out of the car, holding the insulated bag with the pizza inside. He crossed the street, and approached the gate. "Stop him, Blake," Rose said. "I want to, but how?" "I don't know." "Shout." I strode to the front door, hauled it open, and bellowed, "Hey!" Others appeared from the shadows by the gate, a child, with his back to the stone column, glancing my way. Further down the street, I could see the faceless woman with the cigarette appear behind the delivery guy. He didn't stop walking. When he shouted back, I couldn't make out the words. "Stop. I don't want it. Go back to the car." I hollered. Again, I couldn't make out his reply. I watched as the others closed in. The little boy, who'd been scratching himself, walked down the street, so short I could barely make him out over the stone wall which bordered the property. He approached the delivery man head-on, not moving out of the way. When it looked like they might collide, the boy hopped up onto the short stone wall. His hand around the man's wrist. A moment later, so fast I couldn't see it, the boy slammed the delivery guy's hand down on the railing. The man screamed, dropping the pizza, hand impaled on the spiked railing that ran along the top of the short wall. He tried to pull it free, but the boy still had a grip on his wrist. "Hey!" I shouted. I stepped out onto the porch. A girl hopped up, using the man's knee as a foothold, grabbing the delivery man by the jaw. She was more monkey than child as she swung up onto the wall. The momentum of the swing brought his head down and forward, driving it into the top of the railing. I could hear the sound it made on impact, which said a lot, considering how I hadn't been able to hear his words. There was no saying how much was the upper row of teeth breaking on impact with the railing, or the sound of the jaw breaking as it was wrenched down with a sudden weight of the not little girl. The girl let go, walking along the top of the railing, her arms extended to either side, pigtails swinging, the grin the only part of her I could make out beneath the winter clothes, too wide, filled with very white teeth that didn't match each other. I could hear his continued screams, now more strangled than they'd been. I felt cold, paralyzed. Had I just killed a man, simply by inviting him here? The faceless woman caught up to him. Her free hand reached into the back of his head, and I could make out the fingers reaching out the front, moving just beneath the skin, closing together into a fist over one of his eyes. She moved her hand, leaving the skin bound shut in a knot of flesh, and she closed the other eye in the same manner. Another movement, nearer the mouth and throat, and the screams were cut off. Knitting, molding his flesh, almost casually. My concern was no longer that I'd killed the man. My concern was that he might live. "Blake." Rose's voice, from the living room. "You have to help him." I took a step forward, then stopped as the faceless woman continued her work. Her fingers wriggled and crawled across the man's scalp, just beneath his skin, burying his hair, reaching down to cover his ears. Trapping him in his own skin, so his own flesh was a hood over his face. Blake. I thought back to one idle thought I'd had in the past hours. The house was a sanctuary against other and practitioner both. I glanced around me, then very carefully took a step back through the door, past the threshold and into the house. Laird had come to the front door. He's dying. There were rules. I couldn't know which ones still held, here, which ones the locals had called off, while I was a problem. But there were rules. I remained where I was, watching. She held the cigarette aloft, poised as if she might take a puff at any moment, while her other hand pulled free, then plunged into his chest cavity. The muffled grunts and violent jerks he made in response were worse than the screams. I watched a car appear, traveling down the street from the opposite direction the delivery guy had come. The talkative one practically leaped, taking hold of the faceless woman. His momentum turned her around, and he leaned forward, simultaneously leaning her back, so they were pressed together, their bodies covering their victim. I could see the talkative one's face stop an inch from the smudged blur of hers. The car passed, the headlights illuminating what the people in the car would see as two embraced lovers, kissing at the side of the street. The remainder were hidden. I watched as the car reached the end of the road, stopping at a stop sign. Blake, salt is a purifying material, cleansing. It can work against certain others, Rose said. There's a ton in the study, if you can't find any in the kitchen. Go and throw it at them. I didn't move. Blake. Please. She sounded desperate, now. The car turned and disappeared out of sight. The two others broke apart, and the faceless woman clawed at the talkative one. Vicious, angry, almost feral. He gave her only laughs in response, as he ducked out of the way. The faceless woman gave up and turned back to her victim. I could see where she'd reached through his chest to grip the railing, fixing him to the metal. She hit the mirror. The noise Rose was making seemed to get attention. The talkative one looked up at me. I slowly shook my head. I felt physically ill, all expression and utterances choked from me by the feeling of my heart in my throat. The talkative one said something to the others. I saw the delivery guy lurch, tearing free in a mess of blood and ripped skin. His dislocated jaw hung down his teeth a bloody ruin. He laughed, and it wasn't a human sound. When he joined the children in cavorting about, I allowed myself to believe it. He wasn't human. He had never been. An other, joining the faceless woman in some psychological warfare. I could hear them laughing, in the 2 or so seconds it took me to slam the door. It was a trick? Rose asked, as I crossed the room to where I'd left the mirror in the window. They dash. I saw a movement immediately before Rose shrieked. I grabbed the mirror, pulling it away from the window. The little girl with the toothy mouth and the pigtails peeking out from a hat that hid her eyes, hair and ears had appeared just outside the window. She now scratched at the glass with long fingernails. They wanted me outside, I said. The house is a sanctuary, the property isn't. Staying behind the railing like they were, it was meant to mislead us. I might have fallen for it, if Laird hadn't come all the way to the front door. They're clever. The book warned us they were. How sure were you, she asked. That he wasn't human? I didn't answer. Rose was staring at me, and I avoided her gaze. Others were scratching and tapping on windows, now. I heard a scrabbling, as if something was on the porch overhang. God, Rose said. This is what Molly was dealing with, I said, quiet. My heart was still pounding, my mouth so dry I needed to try 3 times before I could speak again, but the fear and helplessness were disappearing. I clenched my fist. All on her lonesome. Hearing things just outside the house, all night. Nowhere good to go for help. We're not in a great place either, Rose said. No. But we have each other, I said. You had my back last night, with pork. I might not have made it home in one piece without that. Thank you, by the way, if I haven't already said. You have, twice, but it's okay. We're figuring this out. I nodded. My thoughts were going a mile a minute, but I had trouble saying just what the destinations were. What are you thinking? Rose asked. I'm thinking, I said, trying to sum it up. I think we're almost ready. Ready? We've seen what kind of games the practitioners will play. We've seen how the others function, in part. We have a sense of what we need to accomplish, and an abstract sense of how. And maybe it helps a little that I'm a bit scared and a lot angry. You want to awaken, she said. I nodded. Before the council meeting tomorrow. Getting a familiar, the tool, and the domain is something that can wait. Yeah, she agreed. I think we should. You want to do it now, or do you need to eat first? Two things, first, I said. Eating isn't one of them. I dialed the pizza place again. Bell Pizza, what can I do for? Hi Dash. No, he said. Not doing business with you. It's about the pizza guy. We never sent anyone. I asked a driver if he wanted to go, he said he wasn't delivering to a haunted house. The irony being this house was maybe the least haunted locale in Jacob's Bell. One of us, I replied. You're assholes, all of you, holding all the rest of us back. You know my brother bought a place here, because this place was supposed to grow. Except you're not selling, and it's losing value every year, needing more repairs. You dash. I just wanted to check the pizza guy wasn't going to show, I said, but he was talking over me. I changed my mind a while ago, remember? Fine, I said. It's just pizza. But he'd already hung up. It's just pizza, I told myself. You can't be surprised. I mean, you knew people hated you here. The woman at the coffee place was surprisingly respectful of the idea that I might be in mourning, I said. Being a decent person and hating our guts isn't mutually exclusive, Rose said. It can't be that big a deal, compared to what just happened outside. You took a shower just a bit ago, I said. Yeah. Sorry to ask, but do you even get dirty, on that side? No, she said. Pretty sure I don't. Some dust, but I don't sweat. I'm guessing you needed to shower to enjoy a mundane comfort, I said. Feel a bit more human. All right, Rose said. Point taken. Sorry about your pizza. I shrugged. I could do with more human comforts myself, she said. I nodded, something to figure out. I'll help any way I can. But first dash. Awakening, Rose said. I nodded. Meet you in the study. I took the stairs 2 at a time. I'd opened the second secret door on the second floor, which made for a quicker arrival at the lower floor. The room was far darker without the sunlight from above. I twisted the knobs of the 2 lamps that sat on and beside the desk, respectively. When the room was still too dark around the edges, I lit the oil lamps at the edges. Each lamp illuminated a slice of the bookcases, cabinets or shelves to either side of them. Where the lettering on books had been done in foil or a reflective material, the lamplight caught it, highlighting the scripts in a soft orange-yellow, while the books themselves remained dark. By the time I'd finished, Rose had lit up the room on her side. The light from behind her made the edges of her clothes and hair glow. She held a wrought iron compass, with a spike in one end and chalk embedded in the other. I watched as she stabbed the floor, then walked in a circle, using the other arm to draw the wide circle in chalk. She had the curved ruler that she used to measure the distance, then erased a spot. She was reaching for the compass again when she looked at me. Blake. You're doing the ritual too. If I can, she said. Aren't you starting? I said there were 2 things I needed to do first, I said. Phoning the pizza place and I crossed the room, lifting a book free of a shelf, then walked back into Rose's field of view. "No, Blake. I hefted the book. Diabolatry, RDT." The black cover was surprisingly flexible and soft, the lettering on the spine and cover were done in gold, catching the lamplight. "No," she said again, as if saying it over and over again with increasing intensity might drive it into my head. "What was it you said?" I asked. "Stupid knee-jerk assumptions are going to get us killed." "I'm all for stupid knee-jerk assumptions when we're dealing with that." Laird said they were the mystical equivalent of nuclear missiles. "I'm not proposing we use them. But I want to know what we're dealing with. Blake. You know that moment in the horror movies, where you're screaming at the actors? Don't go up the stairs, don't touch the glowing skull. Don't read the book." I frowned. "What are you even thinking?" "That the things outside were horrifying, the faceless woman, the pseudo-fairy we ran into. So why are these things so much worse? What makes them nuclear?" We're walking into that meeting, and I can't help but think that everyone there is going to know exactly what's going on here, and we're going to be in the dark. We can't afford to look weak or stupid. "We are weak and stupid," Rose said. "We're untrained, ignorant, out of the loop, and we don't have any of the good stuff that practitioners bring to the table. No tools, no familiars, no domains, no tricks or any of that. We can't afford to let on how badly off we are. Having one tidbit of info we can allude to scare the pants off them if we need it is liable to get us killed," Rose finished for me. "I get it, wanting to know just what we're sitting on, but handling the dangerous goods is not the way to find out." I hefted the book, feeling its weight. "Come on," she said, lowering her voice to be gentler, "I compromised earlier. Can you do the same?" "Damn it," I said. "Is that a yes damn it or a no damn it?" "Yes," I said. I moved to put the book on the bookshelf. A flap of paper caught on the shelf, keeping me from sliding it into place. When I pulled the book back, the paper dropped. Fragments of dry wax and a small key danced across the floor. Folded into thirds, it had been sealed into an envelope of sorts by wax. The key had apparently been melted into the wax, only to be freed by the impact. "Leave it," Rose said. "Nothing good comes of that. Sweep it under the desk, ignore it. Please." "I would," I said, "but wax makes a seal, and that seal just broke." "That's reaching," Rose said. "Okay, maybe," I said. "But tell me you can't imagine a drawing of something coming to life and crawling free of that page." "Now you're being manipulative," Rose said, playing to my paranoia. "You didn't answer the question." "Yes, I can imagine it." "Yes, are you happy?" I wasn't. I picked up the page. On the backside, there were only 2 words. "My heiress." I turned it around. "My heiress. If you've come this far, there must be a pressing need. You've been driven into a corner, or the situation is otherwise dire. I imagine time may well be paramount. Remember that haste makes waste, and you must step with utmost care from this point on. I've left you something, or perhaps it is more correct to say I've left you someone. I refer to him as Barbatorum, making a small joke, as I tend to do, but he is an older one, bearing some status and a few stories from years past, with no name of any meaning that has survived the passage of time. You should be able to find those stories and notes on that status in Dark Names, p. 38. You'll find him waiting in the tower room, which you will need the key to enter. Staying outside the circle is first in your list of things to keep in mind, which I list here because there are no better places to put the warning. I should hope such obvious things don't need to be stated. Cast aside all notion of manners. Do not greet him, do not ever say please or thank him. Do not ask him if he would or could do something. Give him no food or succor. There are older meanings in these things and they will either free him or give him power over you. Sometimes it is very little power, and sometimes it is all the power he needs to achieve his ends. Put aside all metal and reflective things before entering the tower room, and ensure the space remains dark. He exists in a more abstract capacity, whatever physical forms he takes, and if his image is cast in a surface, he will exist in that surface, allowing him to step free of that surface and the confines of the circle. For these same reasons, do not ever look directly at him, even for a moment, lest he be reflected in your eyes. Rest assured, he will not ever step free once he dwells there. He perceives the passage of time differently than we do. He'll be content to sit in the circle I drew out until the sun grows cold. For him, the conversation is ongoing, and you'll need to see the notes on his page in dark names so you can continue from where I, and each member of our line, left off. Failure to do so may confuse or irritate him. In any case, you can come and go, and he'll see no difference in it. He does not speak, which led me to use the shorthand for gestures you'll find on the final page of his entry. Please maintain those notes consistently, for those who come after you. If you intend to deal with him, use one of the templates outlined in dark contracts, which I left to the right of the desk. Page 15, 17, 29 and 77 are good places to look, if you find yourself in a hurry. Do not improvise, for words must be chosen with utmost care. The final third of the book has recommended terminology with examples, which you can insert into the templates as needed. Do not trust Mr. Beasley or his firm for assistance. They are, quite naturally, unreliable on this front. Failing all else, keep your eyes on the painted circle, stay silent, and keep to the contracts found in my books. You can consult my texts if you have any further questions. I regret that I am unable to assist you here. RDT. What is it? Rose asked. The look on your face scares me. The look on my face. I touched my face. You look like someone just died. No, I said. No. I moved to put the letter down on the desk, and it slid off. I picked it up again, tried to put it on the desk, and the corner of the paper caught, bouncing it out of my hand and back onto the floor. On the third attempt, I turned it over, examining it under the light. Sky blue ink on white, barely visible, outlining a script that was reminiscent of the rune that Laird had drawn in sugar. Holding it firmly in both hands, I set it down on the table, pressing it down in place. It stayed. A moment later, as I turned to make sure I'd put the book away properly, I generated a brush of air that sent the letter to the floor again. Once disturbed, apparently, it was insistent on staying disturbed. Experimentally, I tore it, a little tear to cross the sky blue symbols. When I put it down this time, it stayed down. You're scaring me, Blake. She left something behind, I said. Something. Something other. Fitting to her particular specialty. It's upstairs. No. Seeing Rose, I had a sense of how I probably looked. I need to check, I said. There was no argument this time. Chances were good she was too stunned to say anything. The black painted key in hand, I made my way up the ladder, out the door to the top floor, and then up the staircase to the tower room. I checked everything, then pulled off my sweatshirt, in case the tab on the zipper counted as reflective. I swept my hands over my entire body to double-check. The key clicked in the lock. I let the door swing open. When I moved my eyes, I did so with care, keeping to the periphery of the room, then inching closer. The round window jutted out to my right, with a cushioned bench beneath for sitting on. Once upon a time, it would have been a good spot for reading. Now, it was shuttered and locked, with old books stacked on the bench like bricks. A table sat to my left, stacked with papers that were securely weighed down. The floor I saw the circle, painted in white. Circle was perhaps an understatement, given the concentric circles and lines that sprawled across the floor, burdened with embellishment, scripts and geometric shapes, as well as other smaller circles hosting more of the same. It didn't take long for my eyes to see it. A pair of shears, no doubt fallen from the table, impaled a line in the innermost circle of the diagram on the floor. Nothing stood within. Damn it. Very slowly, with exaggerated care, I closed the door. My eyes were fixed on the outermost edge of the circle, my peripheral vision covering the shears and the interior, up until the closing door blocked my field of view. I couldn't say why the closed door made me feel more secure. Whatever was supposed to be in that circle probably wouldn't be stopped by a door. But the fear I'd felt before opening the door had broken up into a general sense of disquiet. My heart wasn't racing, but was pounding, with very slow, heavy beats. Absently, I grabbed my sweatshirt on the way down the stairs. Rose was waiting for me on the third floor. "Blake. You idiot." I didn't want to hear it. "I can barely hear you. Meet you in the study." I passed into the secret room, circled around to the far end and climbed down the ladder to reach the area with the mirror. "What the hell were you doing?" "I take it you read the letter," I said. I was almost relieved to have the distraction of a conversation with Rose. I wanted to think on the circle, the possibilities there, but what the hell was I even supposed to do? I couldn't even think straight, let alone read. Upside down, but yes. You don't go talking to demons or whatever else is without preparation. You don't go running off to check if you haven't read about it in depth. There's material on this guy. Her voice was rising as she talked. "I had to check," I said, feeling more grounded. Feeling a little more sure of myself, I said, "I was thinking it might have killed Molly." "What?" "What Laird said. I had the impression this thing might have killed Molly, and that Laird was misleading us when he said he knew what killed her. By saying that, he leads us to think the threat is from out there, and that way we have our backs turned when the threat from within comes after us. So. You read up on it, so you know what to say to it. I wasn't going to say a thing, if it was there. No need to track the conversation if we don't interact. I only needed a glance, and that glance showed me that there wasn't anything in the circle. What do you mean?" A pair of scissors apparently penetrated a circle drawn on the floor. "It's free." "I don't know," I said. The door was locked. Molly didn't use that key, unless the lawyer resealed it in wax when they reshelved the books. It doesn't fit. Maybe grandmother betrayed her own rules and brought something reflective into that room and then positioned it to where it might interfere with the circle, before locking everything up, but it'd be crazy to do that. If the thing can jump into our eyes, it can jump into the metal on scissors. You're right. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't, I said. Which puts me in the funny spot of feeling more sure that it's in that room, than I was before. "I don't know how you can jump to that conclusion," Rose said. "It's better, now that it looks like it's gone." "I don't know. Which is why we're going to do a little bit of reading, now," I said. I felt more centered. Somewhere between, explaining is the best way to learn and, misery loves company, explaining to Rose had helped me to find my mental and emotional footing, clarifying my thoughts so I could argue them. "Let's meet Barbara Whatsit." I found and picked up dark names. This is the sort of thing we need to read before you go to places like that. "Rose," I said. So much for that bit on emotional and mental footing. I don't want to let this opportunity go by, because it needs saying. First you go off with Laird, and I have to pull your ass out of the fire, and now you go dash. "Rose," I said, louder. She shut up. "We can't do this," I said. "You second-guessing me at every turn. This arguing. I've been through some shit dash." "So have I, in case you haven't noticed," she said, bitter. "Nearly getting killed?" I asked. "I was there. We're connected, Blake. You die, I probably die." "Before," I said. "Before any of this. I'm talking about when I was 17 and newly homeless and picking the wrong spot to settle down for the night, only to find out that a local gang thinks you're staking out their stash or drop point or something, and you get beat down by a group of 6 or 7 people. Or having a group of teenagers with BB guns come after you because they want a live target and you're pretty much subhuman to them. The pellets don't go very far beneath the skin, but one of them hit something, because my arm bruised purple from the bicep to my hand. You never said anything about that, Rose said. There were worse days. Days I'm probably never going to talk to you about. Or tell anyone about, even if some people close to me maybe put some of the puzzle pieces together. I'm not aiming for pity here, I don't want it. I don't want to use this for leverage to win an argument. What I was going to say was that I've been through stuff, before any of this, and I made it this far with my instincts. I can't and won't abandon them. They weren't good when I was first on the streets, either. But I honed them, I stayed alive and mostly whole, I refined those instincts, found people I could trust, and with their help I got to a point where I was surviving on my own. Which is something I'm proud of. I can do the same here, but I need time to get a handle on it all. We don't have time, she said. At this rate, you're going to make a mistake, and we can't afford mistakes. Then help. Continue helping, please. We're the same, the only difference being that I walked a different path. And you're still walking it, Rose said. It's a lot to ask, for me to trust you as an extension of me, when I'm not sure I trust myself. You want me to cater to your unique needs, but is there any consideration to mine? I've got the memories of dealing with our family for years. It doesn't exactly build up a team player mentality. My experiences didn't either, I said. Barring the last year or two. But I'll try if you do. Please. She was glaring at me, practically bristling with frustration. I probably didn't look happy either, now that I thought on it. Without saying anything more, I turned my attention to the book, until I found the page. No image. Only text. I looked up at Rose, and she was gone from the frame. She reappeared, holding her own copy. I could hear the thud as it hit the desk on her side. Page 38, I said. Thank you, she responded. The being I have named Barbatorum is an entity falling under the classification Insolitus Nex. This author does not believe in stricter classifications, and leaves it to others to label him a devil or goblin as they see fit. It is difficult to impossible to guess as to his origins, but one can speculate that it came about after the dawn of human civilization, given the common elements and the trend in appearances. The entity was first bound by this author on April 23, 1953. The binding was a difficult one to tackle, with a little more than a share of guesswork going into the execution. In the end, this author used an ut vires approach pointing to contrarium methodology. An abstract entity bound in a rule-defining diagram of geometric lines and Byzantine notation. 20 years after the fact, this author stands by her reasoning at the time. Should another practitioner need to bait him again, know that this author used a pile of festering boar carcasses, 6 feet high, each carved with his name when well into their state of decay, the decay timed using refrigeration to be roughly parallel, 7 jars of burning hair, resupplied keep the flames perpetually alight, and the crest of this offering was an innocent and a virgin in the form of a 1-year-old innocent, placed at the height of the pile. For more on the reasoning behind this methodology, please see my other work, Dark Contracts, Chapter 4. This author cannot say whether he was attracted to the virgin aspect or the innocent, but this author was nonetheless happy to have an option at hand to serve both purposes. The child was unharmed and largely unaware of what occurred. Given Barbatorum's nature, this author would recommend another means of baiting him in the future, as he will remember, anticipate and adapt with each means used. He agreed to be bound by the seal of Suleiman bin Daud 4 months after the initial capture. See the others volumes, Book 1, Chapter 1, if unfamiliar with the seal. The diagram this author used for entrapment, necessitating only one line to open or close, can be found on page 5 of this entry, followed by the means of summoning and the recommended diagram for imprisonment. Signing Barbatorum to the standard remains the proudest accomplishment for this author, at that particular date and time, marking her first feat in this particular field. Those looking to interact with Barbatorum at any length should see about precautions against abstract entities in classifying others, fiends and darker beings, Chapter 4, and the texts on means of attack and defense against others, in Infernal Wrath, Chapter 2. Rose was already looking up at me when I finished. A bit faster than me when it came to reading. "A baby?" she asked. "Option at hand," I said, as I turned the page to get a look at what came next. "I guess Uncle Charles or Aunt Irene get offhand mentions in the books. This is the second mention of the Suleiman dude I've seen." "Suleiman bin Daoud," she said. "Want to do some side research while I get caught up on Barbatorum? Here. Look up the chapters in those other books, and maybe get some info on the seal." "Okay," Rose said. "Working together." I nodded, then I looked up at the second floor, where the bookshelves lined the walls. I tried to remember, voicing my thoughts aloud as I pointed to each in turn. "Types of magic, Shelf 1, Shelf 2. I think it then focuses on others, 2 or 3 shelves. Can I turn the mirror?" "Sure." I turned the mirror, so Rose had access to the ladder and the bookshelves in question. I resumed reading. Barbers were once surgeons, in addition to their other roles. The red on a barber's pole is a reference to bloodletting. Barbatorum is both, a warrior of sorts, acting with surgical precision on whatever target he is directed at. A recurring theme in earlier stories suggests that he was sent against the summoner's enemies, almost always powerful figures, and he brought them to ruin in the worst ways. He does not seek out mischief with those who summon him, but he takes advantage if one is offered. For this reason, he is a reasonably safe entity to summon if one takes care to follow instructions. He serves as a better deleterious sending against an enemy than he does as a boon giver. This author and 3 acquaintances have summoned and used him without issue. Barbatorum, before being sealed, tended to visit small settlements and sites of war either during or after the altercation. Given his nature, it is hard to get eyewitness reports that corroborate his involvement in events. The unawakened tend to note a stench of rot, blood or burning hair, or a crude but exceptionally sharp and sturdy cutting instrument found in the aftermath of a grisly event, invariably lost a day or 2 later. Physically, he rends his victims, and the surgeon aspect becomes evident in how he inflicts the maximum damage possible without ever killing them, though the methods change as his form does. He will mend the damage with an expert level of care that exceeds typical modern standards, if it means keeping the victim alive. Despite the blood shed in this process, his victims typically die by other means like starvation or dehydration, unable to move under their own power or communicate a request for aid, due to a lack of limbs, missing tongue and teeth or a lack of working sensory organs, and the isolation that follows an attack. On a more abstract level, Barbatorum deals a deeper form of damage that is hard to encapsulate in this text. Rather than state the myriad ways he might harm his victims, this author would suggest a few key points to note, suggesting the wider variety of feats he can accomplish. It is believed that he can sever his target's ability to access any higher plane, forever and irrevocably denying them whatever good things might await them after death, and he can remove any ability a practitioner has. He can pass into a domain without needing permission, though he cannot enter an ordinary home owned by a non-practitioner. See Classifying Others, Chapter 4. He can evade barriers and typical practitioners' defenses. This in mind, he obviously serves as a suitable weapon if directed at a practitioner. Barbatorum takes no one shape, but tends to favor a particular form for several years at a time before unknown events prompt a change. Previous forms include a bipedal sheep, largely bald but for sparse patches, a bloated man disfigured to a monstrous point by lash wounds, a pair of children hand in hand, and a legless man on a horse. In every form, however, he carries a bladed instrument of some kind. He has been known to carry scissors, clippers or shears in more than half of the recorded cases. Death, mutilation and a lack of hair figure into each form in one way or another. See descriptions in individual entries for notes on these fronts. Ergo, the barber reference. The shears are a part of him, I said, more to myself. A glance in the mirror showed me that Rose was on the floor above, a book resting on the railing as she turned a page. Did he leave them behind? Would he? Barbatorum is mute, making dealings hard. He will see a contract up to 7 times before refusing all further contracts. In this event, one can dismiss him and summon him again, but it must be to offer something else. In a dealing, he will offer expert skill in medicine, in exchange for enough blood to make the practitioner pass out. Take care to avoid spilling any on the circle. He will offer to extend a practitioner's natural lifespan by half again or by 25 years, whichever is less, at the cost of the practitioner forever smelling blood, rot, and/or burning hair. He can offer to ensure that one's blades never dull, in exchange for enough of the practitioner's flayed skin to fill 2 cupped hands. There were 2 diagrams drawn out in black, with measurements along each face, and a ritual for summoning him. The rest of the pages had stories. Mutilated men driven to madness, without a thing left. Limbless, suckling fruitlessly on the teats of livestock. Blind men frantically scratching out endless letters to loved ones lost to this barber, using stones on cobblestone, using their fingernails when no tool was at reach, then their blood, and then the uncovered bones of their fingers. That last one was a practitioner that tried to bind him and failed. I reached the last page. Lines were drawn out, with words, followed by a shorthand cipher. I have changed the contract, Tuvag, I have changed the contract, Kchua. So? Rose asked, behind me. He has to be in the circle, still, I said. Or I wouldn't still be here. Apparently we can't sense him until we're awakened, which might explain why I couldn't see him. This guy's spooky. Rose nodded, solemn. The bit on abstract entities is basically elaboration on what's in the note. The bit on attack and defense only matters if he's loose. There are a lot of charts describing what aspects to pay attention to, what elements and objects are most effective. Blood, burning hair, rot, I said. Not like that. Like in Essentials, malignant others are going to react to purifying substances and patterns, like salt and running water. Fresh wood against dead things. Iron against things that are born from nature, I said. Right. But he's not entirely physical, so you need something prepared in advance, meeting a few prerequisites at once. Like, this isn't the right answer, but drawing out a pattern on a baseball bat and hitting him with it. So you're working past the abstract bit, I said. No, I get it. She lifted another book, turning it around so I could see a painting of a brown-skinned man with a funny little golden hat and a magnificent beard. Rose explained, Suleiman. Sorcerer King. He was the first practitioner who really worked for the betterment of mankind and actually made headway. He established rules and contracts, and he systematically worked to challenge the biggest, baddest others out there that he could, then used them to help get others. It brought about an age where humans could stop being the playthings of others and start developing as a civilization. Okay, I said. And the seal? A formal acknowledgement on the part of an other, that they won't interfere with mankind without excuse, they'll obey certain rules, and the practitioners will leave them be. Typically an other bears some symbol or token of this bargain. Over time it's gained a power of its own. Being sealed physically alters the other, but it also affords them certain protections against us. Essentials alluded to that same deal, I said. It was pretty vague. It was because it is, Rose said. I glanced at her, waiting for elaboration, but she only shrugged. We know what Grandma was dealing with now, I said. I didn't add, which I wanted to do in the first place, before you stopped me from reading that book. Instead, I said, we can't know if he's inside that circle or not without awakening. Which we need to do anyways. On to the next part of the game plan. I nodded. My circle is drawn out, she said. Want help? I didn't, but I was happier if she was on my side. Please. Together, we walked through the steps of drawing out the chalk circle. Circle first, then measuring it out so that there were 5 circles at set distances around that circle, the line running through the middle of each before I carefully erased each with a damp cloth. 1 symbol in each little circle. Another circle, larger than the last, around the entire thing, with 6 circles at set intervals. I carefully set out each one. And then a third, bounding the others. 7 circles. You're a lot quicker at this than I was, Rose said. I shrugged. You're faster at reading. Next. Cabinet, Rose said. Bottom shelf, far left. I opened the cabinet. Bottom shelf, far left, the space as empty. I looked back at the mirror, shaking my head. They were on my end. Rose lifted a bowl with crystals in it. Once she showed me, I was able to find it. Bowl, crystals, and a bag with other components, middle shelf, off to one side. It was all clustered together. Each circle on the innermost and outermost ring got a little gold-rimmed bowl. I spoke aloud as I got each set up. Crystal myrrh oil spice. Holly and holly berries, Rose said, at the same time I said, raw iron. We exchanged glances. I stood up and checked my book. Why? Rose asked. Mine says holly. I approached the mirror, book held out. We each held our books out so her book was almost a reflection of mine. Sure enough, the text, the symbol for the inside of the little circle in question and the art for the token were all different. Grandmother? Rose asked. I don't know, I said. I get that Molly would have moved the components, but I don't think Molly altered the book. The question is, what do we do about it? Rose asked. Do we each do a different ritual? Do I do your ritual, assuming it's right? Or vice versa? If it's sabotage, I said, thinking aloud, which of us was sabotaged? We sat there for a good minute, thinking. Rose flipped through her book as I flipped through mine, as we searched for more discrepancies. It was the only one we could find. I hated doing nothing, being stalled like this. It was in the quiet moments that I felt like trouble would start breathing down my neck. I turned to the bags, searching them. Not the contents, but the bags themselves. Holly iron. The holly bag had a different knot. Tied tighter, more neatly. Full. Let me see your ingredients. I asked. Show me the ones you haven't touched. Rose did. Her iron or nuggets were tied the same way my holly was. Molly used the iron, I said. I think I will too. Blind faith? Rose asked me. She's not going to sabotage us, and I can't think of anyone else who could or would. You want to trust the woman who summoned a demon that'll jump into our eyes, and left it in the attic for us to use if we needed? I don't want to. I think I have to. I won't force you to do anything, I said. I got the lamps around the edges of the room and brought them closer to the circle, before using them to light tall candles. I'll do the holly, then, Rose said. I could hear the faint sounds as she dropped individual berries in her bowl. My nuggets made a clatter. More abstract things for the middle ring, I said. Rose gave me directions to find each object she'd already set up on her side. A dagger. An hourglass. A dream catcher. A small silver skull. A coin. Which catches you up to where I was, Rose said. I got stumped. A rose, and something personal. Kitchen for the former, I said. I can't help with the latter. We need the token offerings for the others. I'll need a mirror in the kitchen to get that stuff, with the rose. It wasn't a fast process. Molasses, milk, vegetable matter burned into a clean ash, honey, meat, and alcohol. I plucked a rose from where it sat in water. A touch limp, but it didn't matter too much. My food is looking pretty sad, she said. Am I going to offend them if this milk isn't any good? Did it go bad? I asked. No, but I'm not even sure it's milk. It could be an illusion. It's the thought that counts, right? I asked. I'm not so sure, she said. Not here, with something like this. I put the wine aside for later before going upstairs, my arms full. Everything went into a bowl, except the rose. The basic stuff in the inner ring. The dagger, hourglass, and all the rest in the middle ring, leaving me with one empty circle. The personal touch. I hadn't brought much with me. I could probably dig a paintbrush or something out of a cabinet, but it didn't feel like that was exactly it. I checked my pockets, and I retrieved my keys. Joel's keys were still on them. I felt the weight of them in my hand. They weren't my motorcycle keys, which would have been my first choice, but they sort of fit. Keys opened doors. There was a freedom. They represented ownership, protecting things, and the fact that my friend's keys were on there. I didn't like to owe people things. It was why I tended to insist on some reciprocation, paying back the woman who'd given me a drive here. Giving Joel my bike keys for his. I felt it was important to acknowledge those debts. It would do. The keys found their place in the empty circle. I set out the food as well. One offering to each bowl, for the outer ring. Oh, this next part is fun, Rose said. I checked the book to see. Clothes off. One at a time, or both of us at once? Rose asked. I didn't know. But when I opened my mouth to say so, I felt myself leaning one way, and pushed myself the rest of the way. Both. We stripped down, then sat in the center of the circles, backs turned to each other, with the mirror between us. I had to get up again a moment later, to get the book and lay it across my crossed legs. Then the ritual itself. Looking around, I was aware of how dark the room was, with the oil lamps closer. I'd heated the wax on the bottom of each candle before fixing it to the floor around the circle, and reached for one now, along with a pair of tongs. Incense, lit. Metal or, heated. Metal or, heated some more. Okay, it took a while to get to the point where I could see the heat in it. I quickly set it down, quiet, and moved the candle out of the circle. This was it. I glanced over my shoulder, and I saw Rose, the edges of her shoulder, hair and face lit by the candles and lamps. Our positioning made it hard to see anything else, which was sort of the point. I nodded a little. We began in unison, reading the text. There were 3 translations for each line, one in a foreign language I couldn't place, one spelled out phonetically, and another with the English translation. Our voices faltered some as we stumbled here and there. For the first 4 or 5 lines, one of us would reach the end before the other, pausing a fraction to let the other catch up. We finished one line, almost chanting now as we sounded out the syllables with a kind of rhythm. The circle moved, the bowls sliding across the floor, the diagram moving beneath them. Putting another bowl in front of me. Another line. Again, the circle moved before me. I didn't even dare look back at Rose. We'd found a stride, now, and the words were flowing more easily. The space outside the circle seemed to darken, as my focus on the inside of the circle deepened. I was in the zone, so to speak. My eyes passed over the phonetic guide, but my peripheral vision caught the English words transcribed below, and the meaning became clearer. Not the entire meaning, but the big words, the emphasis. These were the little things, the fundamental things. The bowl of incense slid from its position in front of me, but it slid down and to the right, as if it were sinking into the floor. I didn't look, convinced that I'd lose my stride and break the illusion if I did. The dagger slid into place. There were no words in the book to recite. I could have sworn they'd been there before. The silence rang, heavy. War, I said, if only to keep the momentum going. I could hear Rose behind me, taking my cue. War. The circle moved, giving me a sense of relief, and a view of the hourglass. Time, I said, in unison with Rose. Something we didn't have enough of, something dangerous, foremost in our thoughts, with its association to Laird. The dream catcher, a hoop with a network of threads within. Dream, I said. But Rose was speaking at the same time, and she said, fate. The circle moved. The little silver skull. Deceptively small, no doubt valuable. It glittered in the light. Doom, I said. Death, Rose said. The coin, an old one, from an era before coins had been pressed with exact images. Fortune, I said. Ruin, Rose said. The lifeless Rose. Family, I said. Myself, Rose said. Then the personal token. Somehow, this seemed more meaningful. Weightier. I wasn't being presented with a surprise, something to associate an idea to. This was something else entirely. To everyone and everything that's listening, I said. I heard Rose start speaking behind me, but my words drowned hers out. To me, and to nobody in particular, I've gotta say, I didn't choose this. I'm doing this for family, to respect them as they were in the past, when my cousins were also my friends, so the others don't face what Molly did. I'm doing it to respect stuff in the present, because even if I dislike my cousins, I don't want them to have to face this situation and get killed off. I'm doing this for the family that comes in the future, so my kids and all our descendants don't have this debt hanging over our heads. Above all, I think I'm doing this for my real family. For the friends I made who gave me support when I needed it most, so I can demonstrate what they taught me. Past, present, future, and more abstract. I thought for a second, and then I said, and I'm doing it for me and Rose. Because I won't be trapped like this, and she shouldn't be either. The circle passed on, carrying the keys forward, more like it was going down a spiral staircase I sat in the middle of, than around in a loop. I couldn't even see the floorboards, now. Only the lines and bowls. I could hear Rose behind me, still talking, as if she were very distant. Then a vestige. The circle stood before me. Honey. I looked down at the book, and I started into the phonetic pronunciations again. Each of the dishes passed by me as I recited the lines. More than ritual, I was getting the sense that this was a means of breaking bread. Leaving gift baskets for the neighbors to let them know you were in town. The circle carried the dish onward. There was only the line. I kept reading. More words. I could pick up the English more easily, now. My word is bound and binding. I ask you respect it as such. My actions are my own, but have an equal amount of weight. So I pledge. The line shifted, until the white line was no longer encircling me, but crept towards me, like the divider in the middle of the highway, with my bike veering off course. The divider hit me, passing under my knee, then my legs. It was a matter of seconds before it was passing directly beneath me. A quick glance behind me showed me that it wasn't carrying on. Darkness, one straight white line, and me. More lines appeared. From the other circles that had disappeared, from other directions. My legs shaky, I stood. I nearly fell as a line coursed forth from high above and caught me in the shoulder. I was glad I hadn't fallen. I wasn't sure if there was a ground beneath me to catch me. My feet weren't on solid earth. The lines were larger, more meaningful, and I could see further. I could see the circles attached to each line, like planets in orbit around things I couldn't make out. A system all around me, that I was now a part of. I felt like Rose must feel all the time. Being there, but not quite alive. My body was only there because my sense of self required it. I opened my eyes, and I came back into my body. Chalk lines crossed the floor, the circles still evenly spaced around them, but they had expanded, decentralized from around me. The lines now intersected at points, and the spaces between bowls were 5 to 10 times as far as they had been before. The bowls, as a result, were scattered around the room, each upright. The incense still smoked, but the bowls that had held food were empty. I was standing, the book on the floor in front of me. I reached down to see if there were any other instructions, and stopped. I could see birds, flapping their wings, against my skin. They moved, and the branches they were on bobbed lightly. The watercolor background shifted. "You okay?" Rose asked. I started to speak, and then stopped myself. I had to be careful. "I may be seeing things," I said. I glanced her way, and saw her sitting in front of the mirror. Her legs were bent, knees almost up to her chin, arms around them, protecting her modesty. I turned and stepped around the desk, where the furniture would protect mine. I grabbed my boxers and jeans and pulled them on. I heard a page turn. "The book says you need to learn to manage your extra senses. If you don't, they can swallow you up, and you won't find your way back to reality." I think I remember. It suggests techniques, but you have to find what works for you. Closing your eyes, but not moving your eyelids. Or try refocusing them, and find that point you reach to where you're trying to refocus your eyes, but you're doing something else. It becomes as natural as anything else about your body. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's easy. The bowls were still moving, I noted. The lines still drifting. One bowl made a clink as it reached the wall, tapping the foot of one cabinet. "How did you do it?" I asked, as I buttoned my jeans. But Rose wasn't in the mirror. I looked around me. There were other things that were catching my eye, now. The lettering on books glittered a bit too much here and there, where the light caught it. The script on the letter I'd torn stood out in bright blue where I'd torn it, while the other half remained nearly invisible. I closed my eyes, exhaling, and then opened them. But for the chalk lines and bowls in strange places, the room was normal. I reversed the process. Eyes closed, inhaling, eyes open. Again, there were the hints of life. I could see something faint, like dust motes, spraying lightly where the room ended and the hallway began. As though the space warping effect was creating a kind of friction between spaces. When I focused on the motes, they stood out in my vision, and I could see more of them in the room. I cupped my hand to catch one. It turned, doing a small somersault before darting between the fingers that tried to close around it. I did what I'd done before, but I didn't close my eyes. The effect faded. I turned it on again, but without doing anything with my breath or eyes. Natural. I checked to see if Rose had appeared, verified she hadn't, and picked up the book. I finished the chapter, rereading the bit on being awakened and the sight. Now, as agreed on by men and others, long ago, I'd see what was normally hidden from people. Practitioners fell into categories, depending on their focus. Some carried on this route, learning ways to influence the world that were naturally in tune with their bodies and will. Some practitioners manipulated spirits, getting them to obey or infusing them into objects. There were some who dealt with others. Many cultures, a long, long history of arts being invented and refined, it made for a wealth of possibilities. I felt more equipped, now. I couldn't do anything but see, but I felt calmer, without as great a weight on my shoulders. That would inevitably end when I got to the council meeting. "Rose?" I asked. "Are you getting changed?" I approached the mirror. Her diagram was still on the floor. It hadn't scattered like mine had. It was still in place. I realized I hadn't checked what her personal object was. I searched the outer rim. Coin, skull, dreamcatcher. "I don't think it worked right," Rose said, stepping into my field of view before I could spot it. She was dressed, now. "What?" I asked. "You didn't." "Why not?" "It did something." "What?" I asked. "How can you be sure?" I asked. "I'm not. But nothing ate my offerings like they did yours. Nothing moved, as far as I can tell. I don't think I can see anything on this side, because there's nothing really to see." "Let's check," I said. I walked over to the desk to put the book down, stepping over the dagger. I flipped through it. One page with an image dominating half of it. A symbol was outlined, with arrows suggesting directions for drawing it. A spiral, drawn from the outside in, then a triangle, with one point at the center, all as one motion. First workings. I heard her flipping through pages as well. Yeah. Shamanism, movement, I said. You have to spill blood, she said. I bent down to get the dagger, hesitated, and then cut the tip of my middle finger. Jesus, Blake. I drew out the sign on a cup that was being used to hold pens and pencils. When I looked, I could see the motes floating around and through it. I gestured, a flick of my hand, and they reacted. The cup jerked about 2 inches and crashed to the floor. When I walked back to the mirror, I saw Rose there. She gestured, and the book she'd chosen didn't budge. Try something smaller. It doesn't matter, she said, quiet, because it's not blood. I'm not offering anything worth taking, and there aren't any spirits here to listen and obey, are there? There are other options, maybe. It doesn't matter, she said, again. I don't care anymore. Careful what you say, I said. Our word is binding. Her voice sounded like it was on the brink of breaking with emotion. Good night if I don't run into you before you go to bed. I'm going to take a bit to myself. I wanted to say something to console her, but I wasn't sure what. Rose, I said, but she was already gone. I turned the mirror, following her, and she startled a little, almost stumbling as she nearly walked into a wall. What? She asked, clearly annoyed. I'm going to check on the barber again, if that's okay. I won't say or do anything. I just think it's good to check. She nodded, mute. Sorry, I said. I know you are, she responded. She smiled back, a tight, joyless expression. You can't exactly lie now, can you? With that, she stepped out of my field of view. I shut off everything, as I'd done before, and opened the door to the tower. This time, I looked, using the sight, keeping my eyes trained on the floor, using only peripheral vision to take in the circle. It was still empty. I felt a quavering in my stomach, a kind of fear. He'd seemed so vague, in the books, but now that vague thing, capable of inflicting unspecified horrors on me, it was free. I stood there, eyes on the floor, thinking. When he appeared, it was so sudden I very nearly looked out of instinct. He was crawling out of the shears. Out of the reflective surface, and into the middle of the circle. A brown-skinned man, his pale hair scraggly and long, inconsistent here and there, more baldness than hair. He was old, wizened, with a potbelly, and spots all over his skin. I couldn't get more specific details without looking at him, and I wasn't about to look. An old Middle Eastern or Indian man, malnourished to the point that his stomach was swelling. He bent down, hauling the shears out of the ground. I could see the painted circle the shears had penetrated disappear, as if it were only a coincidental light effect the shears had cast. He sat down, his back to me, bony rear end on the hard floor, and then plunged the shears into his leg, like a gardener might stick a shovel in the dirt so it would stay upright for when he needed it. Barbatorum leaned over, resting one narrow arm in the space between the 2 arms of the shears, forcing them open and gouging his leg open wider. A foul stench filled the room. He wasn't acknowledging me. Which I was fine with. I eased the door shut, eyes still fixed on the floor. There was a council meeting to prepare for.